We received a question in the comments section of the latest video, 10 Nazi Occultists, Part 1. And the question reads, "It sounds like you're saying the source of the notion of the Ascended Masters was originally Bulwer-Lytton and later taken up by Theosophy. Is that in fact true? I have always been under the impression the Ascended Masters were originated out of Theosophy." Thank you very much to the questioner. Nothing is written one. It's a great question. I won't presume to be able to settle the matter conclusively. I'll merely highlight some key elements that seem to me relevant in the investigation. But let me state it as a short answer first, and then I'll give a longer version. And I apologize that the visual aids are not as elaborate in this than they would be in one of our longer videos. So in brief, I think you could put it this way. The concept of Ascended Masters evolved over time. Major steps in this development occurred within Theosophy, and that would include H.P. Blavatsky and her numerous heirs. But there were also significant precursors, including Sir Edward Bulwer-Lytton, whose fictions contained key elements that would be amplified and then later modified by these Theosophists. Firstly, it's indisputable that the contemporary notion of an Ascended Master has been thoroughly shaped by Theosophy and its adherents. A quick scan of the relevant article on Wikipedia makes this plain by gesturing towards people like Charles Webster Leadbeater, Guy Ballard, and, of course, H.P. Blavatsky. For my part here, I will focus on her. But a major caveat is that the same wiki article just noted credits Baird T. Spalding with coining the phrase Ascended Masters. So if we want to probe the origins of the phrase, maybe we trace it to Spalding. But if we want to probe the origins of the concept, rather than just the mere introduction of the words, then we need to go back a bit further. I have notes for doing a longer video on this very subject, but to make sure everybody's on the same page for this brief question and answer, let's get a working definition. Googling define Ascended Master, at the time of this writing anyway, I got a snippet from Wikipedia. So let's go to its article already mentioned where we may detect two main features. Number one, we read, Ascended Masters, as written about in the Theosophical tradition, are held to be enlightened beings who, in past incarnations, were ordinary humans, but who have undergone a series of spiritual transformations called initiations. As I said in the Nazi video, and as is evident in the opening paragraphs of the current wiki article, Theosophy pioneered a concept of spiritual evolution. In a sense, becoming an Ascended Master or a Master of Wisdom is the goal, or telos, of this spiritual evolutionary process. In other words, an Ascended Master is someone who is highly spiritually evolved. But there is another aspect of the Ascended Master mythos, and perhaps it is the more important element from the point of view of the video that we made, so call this number 2. And this aspect is that the evolved adepts somehow and supposedly direct humanity or guide history or something along those lines. So it's presumably not enough to be spiritually involved to be an Ascended Master. You also have to join the World Adept Club, so to speak. These two pieces together form the definition for an Ascended Master as a first pass. But it seems that they can also be assessed differently in terms of their pedigree. So both conditions. Condition 1, to be spiritually evolved. Condition 2, to be part of this world-controlling secret group. Both may have different pedigrees, and that is essentially what I think is going on with Bulwer-Lytton. So take the former, the idea of spiritual evolution. Blavatsky's views about enlightenment are heavily influenced by Hinduism and Buddhism. Blavatsky was shaped in her thinking by her reading of such works as Samuel Beal's collection of Buddhist scriptures, published in 1872, as well as Horace Hayman H. Wilson's 1840 summary of Hindu philosophy. Blavatsky was also impressed by the speculations of Louis Giacolio, who supposed that Western occultism derived from India. For example, in his 1875 volume, Spiritism in the World, Initiation and Occult Sciences in India and Among All Peoples of Antiquity. To these, Blavatsky added a dose of evolutionism. This seems to have been filtered to her from people like philosopher John Fiske, geologists Sir Archibald Geikie, Sir William Boyd Dawkins, and the controversialist Alexander Winchell. Of course, Charles Darwin would be the ultimate fountainhead for a lot of this. Now, it's possible to say that Blavatsky created the notion that evolution applies to spiritual progression, and it's possible to call a fully spiritually evolved person an Ascended Master. So in this sense, it's fair to suggest that the Ascended Master concept comes from Blavatskian Theosophy. This would be part 1 of that definition that we sketched earlier. Obviously, this part of the definition didn't arise in a vacuum, as we just suggested. Blavatsky had numerous intellectual predecessors, not all of whom she adequately acknowledged, and that's part of the criticism that René Guénon and William Emmett Coleman have directed against her, among many others. But for instance, while we're on this wavelength, it is probably noteworthy that Thomas Williams Rhys Davids, in his 1880 book Buddhist Birth Stories, refers many times to Gautama Buddha in ways that would be considered analogs of the ultimately developed ascended master concept. So, for example, he uses the word ascending in various ways, applying to Gautama Buddha, including how he ascended to Buddhahood. Davids also speaks of Gautama Buddha mastering various meditative and other techniques. So you have the concept of ascending, and you have the concept of mastering techniques. It would be easy to think that Rhys Davids' volume is a significant foreshadowing of the ascended master concept. But we can't forget that arguably the ascended master lore has that second element also, which we previously identified as the idea that a group of personalities intervene in or run human affairs from behind the scenes. It's this aspect of the ascended master concept that Blavatsky may owe partially to novelists like Sir Edward Bulwer-Lytton. Or, let me say it a little more carefully, when Blavatsky arrived on the scene, there was already a long-standing tradition of speculation relating to a group of people plotting to control or take over the world. I've got notes for a video tentatively titled 10 Precursors to the Illuminati, where I'll go into some of this a little more in depth. Suffice to say here that the shadowy and possibly non-existent Rosicrucian Brotherhood, also called the Invisible College, is just one instantiation of this sort of hypothetical cabal. The historian Nicholas Goodrick-Clarke, for example, wrote that, quote, "The genre of Gothic literature contributed to a mysterious cult of Rosicrucianism." Goodrick-Clarke then follows with this observation, quote, "The novels of William Godwin, Percy and Mary Shelley, Charles Maturin, and Sir Edward Bulwer-Lytton variously elaborated the themes of a secret invisible order whose adepts had achieved immortality by means of the elixir of life." End quote. Crucial to note then are the following. Firstly, Blavatsky was influenced by French magus Eliphas Lévy, and Lévy and Bulwer-Lytton were supposedly personally acquainted. They were even said to have met face-to-face in London around 1854. Additionally, Bulwer-Lytton had been given the honorific patron of the English Societas Rosicruciana in Anglia, and under Kenneth R.H. Mackenzie, there was a pipeline established between the SRIA and France. And second, and even more basically than this, Blavatsky published Isis Unveiled in 1877. She started to work on it maybe around 1875. The Secret Doctrine appeared in 1888. Bulwer-Lytton's novel, The Coming Race, or Vril, The Power of the Coming Race, was printed in 1871, fully 4 years before she even started working on Isis and 6 years before she published it. So when you look at the time order alone, Bulwer-Lytton came first. And again, we're speaking of that second piece of the definition, namely that there's a group, a cabal, behind the scenes, controlling history, influencing history, and so on. But at the same time, Bulwer-Lytton did include elements that this hidden race controlled the Vril force and, in a way, had elevated powers compared to the average person. Now, I'm not going to press the idea that Blavatsky's idea of spiritual evolution is itself borrowed from this idea of Vril. I think its antecedents belong in Buddhism, in the evolutionary theory, which she modified, as I just said. But it's clear, I think, that Bulwer-Lytton put a group of people, a group of adepts, in a secret location and gave them supernatural powers, and that this certainly would count as a precursor idea to the Ascended Masters. But as usual, there are many complications. The initial complication was the fact that I analyzed the Ascended Master notions into two main categories, the spiritual evolutionary category and the world controller category. You could complain that I've left something out, and that would be its own complication. But what I have in mind is that you can assess the pedigree of both of those components separately. So I suppose I'd say that the world-controlling component in the theosophical notion of the Ascended Masters, whenever this aspect is present, and it isn't always present, it owes to people like Bulwer-Lytton. At least it owes some debt to Bulwer-Lytton and other novelists and theorists as well. The evolutionary aspects can be traced to Darwin, and the spiritual foundation is quite obviously esoteric Buddhist. But another complexity is this. There are a wide variety of terms and phrases that one encounters in the literature. Besides Ascended Master, we also find terms like Mahatma, Master of Wisdom, Secret Chief, and so on. We are therefore confronted with another problem, which is, should we take all of these as synonymous or not? Theoretically, you could say that each word has its own origin story. Maybe you could say, for instance, that Blavatsky popularized the term Mahatma, and then Baird Spalding separately popularized the term Ascended Master. So in that case, we would say that it wouldn't be Theosophy full stop that created the term Ascended Master. It would be Spalding. We would say Blavatsky came up with something different called the Mahatma, which obviously the language of that she borrowed from Buddhism. This kind of thing, breaking this term down or acknowledging that there are several different terms that are sometimes used as synonyms but maybe shouldn't be used as synonyms, this kind of thing has precedent in other studies. For instance, in 10 Unnamed Bible Figures, we looked at the character of the Antichrist. Now, the word Antichrist only occurs in the first and second letters of John. If you restricted yourself to these, you would not have the now common literary depiction of a personal, incarnate spawn of Satan who appears during the end times and causes mischief on the world scene. To get this fuller literary depiction, you have to add material found in other biblical books and indexed with different terminology, such as, for example, the beast, or really beasts, plural, of the book of Revelation, and the obscure little horn mentioned in the book of Daniel, and so on. Now, we have a similar problem in the present case. According to some Theosophists, like the author Pablo D. Sender, I'm not sure if that's a reference to descent, like Descender, if that's his actual name, but according to him, you have to distinguish the concepts of ascended masters and Mahatmas. And he gives several reasons for this. In his view, ascended implies either that the person escaped physical death or that they have shed their physical body, whereas Mahatmas, which he associates with bodhisattvas, are successively reincarnated people with living bodies. So ascended masters, like the I Am movement claimed Guy Ballard was one, he has simply departed the earth, and now he's in spirit form. Or Mark Prophet from the Church Universal and Triumphant, at least it was named that by Elizabeth Clare Prophet. He's no longer with us, but according to some of his followers, his spirit is now an ascended master. On the other hand, what Sender has to say here is that Mahatmas are alive on the earth, in living bodies. Now, all this is fine as far as it goes, but when Sender appeals to biblical examples like Jesus and Jesus' ascension, as occultists invariably do, I find his analysis partially confusing resurrection with translation, but that's a story for a different time. Sender further proceeds to distinguish ascended masters and masters of wisdom with respect to their functions. In the latter case, according to him, truly theosophical masters of wisdom are concerned with humanity's spiritual condition, whereas in the former case, ascended masters, according to him again, merely traffic in things like creature comforts, things associated with the physical world, which according to a theosophist and following Buddhist Hindu thought is an illusion. The physical world is simply an illusion, Maya. It's not entirely clear then whether theosophical masters would bother themselves with the political affairs of mankind in the manner that preoccupied some of the occultists that we profile, for example, in the video. This may be one reason why there is sometimes a distinction drawn between Agartha or Agarti and Shambhala. Occasionally, this distinction is drawn along the lines of white magic and black magic. One of them, say Agartha, was on the wavelength of white magic, and the other one, say Shambhala, was on the wavelength of black magic. But we could equally well see the same distinction or a similar one drawn according to whether the alleged masters are concerned with higher or lower level affairs. And we could say, well, one of them qualifies as genuine masters of wisdom, whereas the other ones are ascended masters because they're concerned with base things. And possibly, if we did that, we could trace two separate genealogies. The final element of all of it is this. Blavatsky tells one story, academics tell another. Blavatsky claimed to have received many of her occult doctrines directly from the Mahatmas, people like Master Morya and Kutumi. Another angle that I haven't explored here, but I will mention in closing, is that she claims to have had dealings with Max Theon's Hermetic Brotherhood of Luxor. And in particular, some in the literature have associated her early training with an elusive magician named Paulos Metamon. So it's a possibility that some of this Ascended Master stuff or Mahatma stuff came from the Hermetic Brotherhood of Luxor. Now, things get complicated, and we mentioned this in 10 Sex Magic Cults, that the Hermetic Brotherhood of Luxor may or may not have gotten some of its information from the American Pascal Beverly Randolph. So if that's the case, then it's very difficult to trace the evolution of any of these ideas. But Bulwer-Lytton would still be in the mix in terms of this Ascended Master ideology, even if we wanted to include the Hermetic Brotherhood of Luxor. Now, on the other hand, scholarly opinion has it that Blavatsky actually derived her ideas not from mystical association with these Mahatmas or covert spiritual communication from them, but rather from her predecessor esoterics and their published works, a few of which I have already named above. In other words, she just did a lot of reading, and she wrote these books, Isis Unveiled and The Secret Doctrine, basically like research papers, except she didn't cite anything. or at least she didn't cite very much. But this idea that she claims to have direct spiritual revelation, and the academics look at it and say, no, she probably got all this from research. Similar problems attend many other occultists. You can think of, for instance, seminal Wiccan Gerald Gardner. He said he learned witchcraft from a then living English practitioner named Old Dorothy. Historians are more likely to cite Gardner's acquaintance with English and Malayan folklore, Margaret Murray's book, The Witch Cult in Western Europe, published in 1921, and Gardner's affiliation with Ordo Templi Orientis occultist Aleister Crowley. Maybe the upshot is that, for true believer Theosophists anyway, Blavatsky and company originated the Ascended Master notion, full stop. Maybe she even received it wholesale from these Ascended Masters. In other words, she was initiated by them, trained by them, and so she was simply reporting what she learned directly, whether through some form of clairvoyance or through a personal tete-a-tete in Tibet. In my opinion, Theosophy rather combined and modified several ideas that were already floating around in the ether. And as I say, if you look at those two core ideas, spiritually evolved person, and number two, a behind-the-scenes world controller, I think you can say that Bulwer-Lytton clearly contributed some precursory ideas to the second, that there's a group hidden somewhere that stands behind history and pulls the levers of power secretly. Bulwer-Lytton, I think, clearly contributed to that. On the spiritual evolutionary wavelength, it is not as clear in Bulwer-Lytton, but it's certainly clearer when you simply consult with esoteric Buddhist sources, Hindu sources, and the like of that. So I hope that helps. Stay tuned for more because, like I said, I do intend to do 10 precursors to the Bavarian Illuminati. I also have additional material on Rosicrucians that I want to get out, and that would include the Invisible College and its predecessors. So lots more to talk about here, but I was interested enough, the question was complex enough that I thought I would do this brief video.